I'm Stephen Dial in Dallas.
I'm Rudy Koski in Austin.
And I'm Greg Krugen in Houston, and this is Texas, The Issue Is.
We already know it's well reported that the state has a record surplus, and lawmakers have been focused on talking about giving that money back to taxpayers, specifically with property tax relief. But in his inaugural address, Governor Greg Abbott gave us a preview of some other priorities this session.
And thank you for the trust that you have placed in me to lead our great state for 4 more years.
For the third time, Greg Abbott took the oath of office as governor of Texas. With a more than $30 billion surplus, Abbott, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and House Speaker Dade Phelan made it known what their priorities are. The biggest promise, giving the money back to the taxpayer. In his speech, Abbott mentioned infrastructure, something Speaker Phelan says should be a priority with the extra money.
We must work this session to bolster our infrastructure, including the roads that we drive on, the water that we use at home and in our fields, and the ports that we use to ship products around the entire globe. Our state is so grand, we now have more than 30 million people who call Texas home.
While big-ticket items may not have widespread bipartisanship this session, making schools safer following the Robb Elementary mass shooting in Uvalde is expected to have bipartisan support. Democrats likely won't get any meaningful wins when it comes to gun reforms, but both sides could come together on mental health funding and hardening schools.
We must prioritize protecting students and staff. We must provide mental health services to students who need it. Parents must know that their children are going to be safe when they drop them off at school every single morning. We will not end this session without making our schools safer.
Abbott urged lawmakers to fix the bond process.
We must end the easy bail policies that let dangerous criminals back out onto our streets. We must impose mandatory sentences on criminals caught with guns and mandatory sentences on anyone caught smuggling illegal immigrants in Texas.
Republicans and Democrats agree there's a problem on the southern border. For the first time in 2 years, President Biden visited the border in El Paso. Republicans like Senator John Cornyn told reporters the president's visit can't just be a photo op, saying there needs to be real change.
More illegal immigrants crossed our border than the populations of Austin, El Paso, and Houston combined.
Operation Lone Star, seen as a political stunt by Democrats, has cost the state billions of dollars. While the Texas National Guard presence at the border has decreased in number, Abbott says he will continue to fund the operation and will continue to bus asylum seekers to Democrat-led cities.
Our job is to deliver solutions for our fellow Texans, and by God, that is exactly what we are going to do this session.
So we got a sneak peek at some of the other things that Governor Abbott is really looking into. Rudy, what's your one word to describe that speech?
Stephen, my one word is chorus line.
Okay. Greg, what about you?
My word, Stephen, is consistent.
Consistent. The Fox Texas Trio will be back to discuss more after this break. The Fox Texas Trio is back. Governor Greg Abbott now fully taking the oath of office, giving his inaugural address. In response to that, new House Democrat Chair Trey Martinez Fisher responded to Abbott's speech by saying that Republicans, specifically Abbott, has not given an economic plan to help Texans dealing with economic pain. He also said that Republicans and Abbott are responsible for high prices, like grocery prices. Rudy, was that a good strategy by the Democrats?
That's a bold move, Stephen, to somewhat quote a line from the Dodgeball movie. You know, the initial reaction that I had when I heard that was, you know, there's going to be some hard pushback on Democrats for that, with many noting that inflation pressure is really attributed to the Biden administration, not the Republicans. You know, it reads like the daily spin that we get from the White House press secretary, Stephen.
Greg, do you think Democrats missed the mark with this response to Governor Abbott's speech?
Stephen, of all the arguments they could have made, this, in my view, is the least defensible. Keep in mind the staggering amount of federal spending pushed through Congress by both the Republicans and Democrats has been a key driver of inflation. Now, over the past 2 years, President Biden and Democrats, rightly or wrongly, shoved trillions of borrowed dollars into the economy, and prices were certain to rise as Americans rushed to spend them. To turn around and blame Texas Republicans for doing too little to subsidize Texas families feeling the squeeze seems like pretty thin soup. Remember, Abbott and the GOP crew won in November by double digits with the message, Texas is the state of unrivaled opportunity for those who are willing, rather than a state of generous, guaranteed entitlements.
Let's take a transition. This week, the House in Texas came out with their base budget, a lot of extra money. Rudy, do you think Democrats will be able to get anything on their wish list financially from the legislature this year?
Yes, Stephen, there's a lot of money at play, right? The budget plans for the House and the Senate are long, long reads, each over 1,000 pages long. So I think the Democrats will have a little time to lay out a specific plan for the surplus next month. That's after the governor's State of the State address. They can't afford, in my opinion, only to be a voice of opposition. Greg touched on that just a moment ago, and rehash just a party platform wish list. An opportunity for some creative ideas right there waiting. And like you said earlier, both the House and the Senate base budgets leave a lot of money on the table, about $50 billion. That's billion with a B. Now, granted, while the spending proposals are huge, totaling about $130 billion in general revenue, to get all of that extra money, lawmakers will have to bust the state spending cap, or at least find a way to get around it. And that will be tricky procedurally and politically. Stephen?
The House and the Senate also have bills that regulate drag shows, but some are saying it's too broad. Some are saying you're looping in possibly concerts coming into town, or looping in regular theater shows that happen in our school districts. Greg, do you think something that will regulate drag shows pass the legislature, and do you think they're just going to go back to the drawing table and make it more narrow in scope?
Look, Stephen, drag show regulation is just the latest venue for the values war, and I do think something will make it to Abbott's desk. Why? Because Republicans control both houses, and it chaps the GOP base in a big way that publicly funded venues are being used to, in their mind, normalize activities they find morally repugnant and socially destructive. As for the First Amendment issue, free speech on school campuses and libraries is not the same thing as in the public square, so to speak. I'm no lawyer, but there are necessary limits on campus. That said, I think Republican activists would almost welcome court challenge as a means of perpetuating the conflict. This is, after all, a values war.
Let's transition quickly back to money and infrastructure. Rudy, Governor Greg Abbott briefly touched on infrastructure. That's something Speaker Dave Phelan wants. Is that kind of an olive branch from the governor?
It could be. You know, the governor used the state song Texas, Our Texas as his outline for his speech. It allowed him to frame the speech with his familiar chorus of how great the state is doing economically. That's why my word was a chorus line. Governor Greg Abbott could be giving a signal to everyone, just not the speaker, that he has heard the comments from those who want basic things fixed across the state. Promising a property tax payback, you know, that's great messaging on the campaign trail. But a lot of people are saying to me, saying what the speaker is saying. Fix the dang potholes. Build and expand some freeways, not tollways, freeways. Put up more utility lines and come up with a better way to do water banking, a better water banking idea to give the state a larger safety net or bucket during times of drought. Ideas like that. Stephen?
Greg, is Governor Abbott going to try to let both chambers duke it out and he'll just see what bill comes to his desk?
Stephen, the infrastructure pitch is a surefire winner. Fuels jobs, lifts the economy, and most importantly, attracts more businesses and talent to relocate to Texas in the future. You know, in a recent speech, Phelan talked about the major Wall Street ratings agencies saying Texas is literally doing everything right except upgrading and replacing its tired, often insufficient infrastructure. Ultimately, this battle this session will get regional, as in funding water systems in thirsty West Texas versus storm and flood protection for the Gulf Coast. Bottom line, everybody gets something.
All right, that's all the time we have for now. To see this episode and any of our other episodes, go to our station's YouTube channels.
And keep the conversation going by sending us questions on our social media pages.
The 88th Texas legislature is just getting started, and next week we will dive into yet another issue of interest to all Texans. In the meantime, remember to let us know what you think the issue is.